town, so I thought I would try your way of... She was hard muscle and soft curves. She glistened damply from head to feet. He had never imagined that her legs were so long. I thought you would remain longer at the bridge. I... Her voice rose in pitch. Her eyes widened in panic. I did not arrange for you to see me. I must get away from you. As far away as I can. I must. Suddenly, a shimmering vertical line appeared in the air near her. It widened as if rotating into a gateway. Icy wind rushed through it into the room, carrying thick curtains of snow. I must get away, she wailed, and darted through into the blizzard. Immediately, the gateway began to narrow again, turning. But without thought, Rand channeled, blocking it at half its former width. He did not know what he had done or how, but he was sure this was a gateway for traveling, such as Asmodean had told him of, and been unable to teach him. There was no time for thinking. Wherever Aviendha had gone, she had gone naked into the heart of a winter storm. Rand tied off the clothes he had woven as he ripped all the blankets from the bed and tossed them onto her clothes and pallet. Seizing blankets, clothes, and rugs all together, he plunged through, only moments behind her. Icy wind screamed through night air filled with swirling white. Even wrapped in the void, he could feel his body shivering. Dimly, he could make out scattered shapes in the darkness. Trees, he thought. There was nothing for him to smell but cold. Ahead of him, a form moved, obscured by darkness and the snowstorm. He might have missed it, but for the sharpness of his eyes in the void. Aviendha, running as hard as she could. He lumbered after her through snow to his knees, clutching the thick bundle to his chest. Aviendha, stop! He was afraid that the howling wind would sweep his shout away, but she heard, and if anything, ran faster. He forced himself to more speed, staggering and tripping as the deepening snow tugged at his boots. The prints left by her bare feet were filling fast. If he lost sight of her in this... Stop, you fool woman! Are you trying to kill yourself? The sound of his voice seemed to flog her to run harder. Grimly, he pushed himself, half falling and scrambling back up, knocked down by the hurtling wind, as often as stumbling in the snow, blundering into trees. He had to keep his eyes on her. He was only thankful this forest, or whatever it was, had trees so far apart. Plans skittered across the void and were discarded. He could try quelling the storm, and maybe the result would be to turn the air to ice. A shelter of air to keep the falling snow away would do nothing for that underfoot. He could melt a path for himself with fire, and slog through mud instead. Unless... He channeled, and the snow ahead of him melted in a band a span wide, a band that ran ahead of him as he did. Steam rose, and falling snow vanished a foot above the sandy soil. He could feel the heat of it through his boots. Down almost to his ankles, his body shook with the bone-chilling cold. His feet sweated and flinched away from the heated ground. But he was catching up now. Another 5 minutes, and... Suddenly, the vague shape he had been following vanished, as if she had fallen into a hole. Keeping his eyes fixed on the spot where he had last seen her, he ran as hard as he could. Abruptly, he was splashing in icy, flowing water to his ankles, halfway to his knees. Ahead of him, the melting snow revealed more, and an edge of ice inching slowly back. No steam rose from the black water. Stream or river, it was too big for the amount of his channeling to warm the swift-moving flow even a hair. She must have run out onto the ice and fallen through. But he would not save her by trying to wade into this. Filled with Saidin, he was barely aware of the cold, but his teeth chattered uncontrollably. Retreating to the bank, gaze locked on where he thought Aviendha had gone down, he channeled flows of fire into the ground still bare, well back from the stream, until the sand melted and fused and glowed white. Even in this storm, that would stay hot for a time. He set the bundle down in the snow beside it. Her life would depend on finding the blankets and rugs again. Then waded through the deep white to one side of the melted path and lay flat. Slowly, he crawled out onto the snow-covered ice. The wind shrieked across him. His coat might as well not have existed. His hands were numb now, and his feet going. He had stopped shivering except for an occasional shudder. Perfectly calm inside the void, he knew what was happening. There were blizzards in the two rivers, perhaps even as bad as this. His body was being overwhelmed. If he did not find warmth soon, he would be able to calmly watch from the void as he died. But if he died, Aviendha would too, if she had not already. He felt rather than heard the ice cracking beneath his weight. His probing hands fell into water. This was the place, but with snow whirling about, he could barely see. He flailed, searching, numb hands splashing. One hit something at the edge of the ice, and he commanded his fingers to close, felt frozen hair crackling. Got to pull her out. He crawled backward, hauling at her. She was a dead weight, sliding slowly out of the water. Don't care if the ice. Better that than freezing or drowning. Back. Keep moving. If you quit, she dies. Keep moving, burn you. Crawling. Pulling with his legs. Pushing with one hand. The other locked in Aviendha's hair. No time to get a better grip. She could not feel it anyway. You've had it easy for too long. Lords kneeling and Guy Shine running to fetch your wine and Moraine doing as she's told. Back. Time to do something yourself if you still can. Move, you flaming fatherless son of a spavined goat. Keep moving. Suddenly, his feet hurt. The pain began creeping up his legs. It took him a moment to look back, and then he rolled off the steaming patch of melted sand. Tendrils of smoke, where his breeches had begun smoldering, were whisked away by the wind. Fumbling for the bundle he had left, he swathed Aviendha from head to foot in all of it. The blankets, the rugs of her pallet, her clothes. Every bit of protection was vital. Her eyes were closed, and she did not move. He parted the blankets enough to put an ear to her chest. Her heart beat so slowly that he was not sure he was really hearing it. Even 4 blankets and half a dozen rugs were not enough. And he could not channel heat into her as he had the ground. Even finding the flow as much as possible, he was more likely to kill than warm. He could feel the weave he had used to block open her gateway, a mile or perhaps 2 away through the storm. If he tried to carry her that far, neither of them would survive. They needed shelter, and they needed it here. He channeled flows of air, and snow began to move across the ground against the wind, building into thick, square walls 3 paces on a side, with 1 gap for a door, building higher, compacting the snow till it glistened like ice, roofing it over high enough to stand. Scooping Aviendha into his arms, he stumbled into the dark interior, weaving and tying flames dancing in the corners for light, channeling to scoop more snow to close the doorway. Just with the wind shut away, it felt warmer, but that would not be enough. Using the trick Asmodean had shown him, he wove air and fire, and the air around them grew warmer. He did not dare tie that weave off. If he fell asleep, it could grow and melt the hut. For that matter, the flames were almost as dangerous to leave, but he was too bone-weary and chilled to maintain more than 1 weave. The ground inside had been cleared as he built, bare sandy soil with only a few brown leaves he did not recognize, and some scruffy, low, dead weeds that were equally strange to him. Releasing the weave that warmed the air, he heated the ground enough to take away the iciness, then took up the other weave again. It was all he could do to lay Aviendha down gently, rather than drop her. He pushed a hand inside the blankets to feel her cheek, her shoulder. Trickles of water ran across her face as her hair melted. He was cold, but she was ice. She needed every scrap of warmth he could find for her, and he did not dare warm the air more. Already the insides of the walls shone with a faint layer of melt. However frozen he felt, he had more heat in him than she did. Stripping off his clothes, he climbed into the coverings with her, arranging his own damp garments on the outside. They could help hold in the body heat. His sense of touch, enhanced by the void and Saidin, soaked in the feel of her. Her skin made silk feel rough. Compared to her skin, satin was... Don't think. He smoothed damp hair away from her face. He should have dried it, but the water no longer felt so cold, and there was nothing but the blankets or their clothes to use anyway. Her eyes were closed. Her chest stirred against him slowly. Her head lay on his arm, snuggled against his chest. If she had not felt like winter itself, she could have been sleeping. So peaceful, not angry at all. So beautiful. Stop thinking. It was a sharp command outside the emptiness surrounding him. Talk. He tried talking of the first thing that came to mind. Elaine, and the confusion her 2 letters brought. But that soon had thoughts of golden-haired Elaine drifting across the void, of kissing her in secluded spots in the stone. Don't think of kissing, fool. He shifted to Min. He had never thought about Min that way. Well, a few dreams could not count. Min would have slapped his face if he ever tried to kiss her, or else laughed and called him a woolhead. Only it seemed that speaking of any woman reminded him that he had his arms around a woman who had no clothes on. Filled with the power, he could smell the scent of her, feel every inch of her as clearly as if he were running his hands. The void trembled. Light, you're only trying to warm her. Keep your mind out of the pigsty, man. Trying to drive thought away, he talked of his hopes for Cairhien, to bring peace and an end to the famine, to bring the nations behind him without any more bloodshed. But that had its own life, too, its own inevitable path to Shale Ghul, where he must face the Dark One and die, if the prophecies were true. It seemed cowardly to say that he hoped he might live through that somehow. Aiel did not know cowardice. The worst of them was brave as a lion. The breaking of the world killed the weak, he had heard Bale say, and the threefold land killed the cowards. He began speaking of where they might be, where she had brought them with her wild, senseless flight. Somewhere far and strange to have snow at this time of year. It had been worse than a senseless flight. Mad. Yet he knew that she had fled from him. Fled from him. How she must hate him, if she had to flee as far as she could, rather than just tell him to leave her to her bath in privacy. I should have knocked at his own bedroom door. I know you do not want to be around me. You don't have to be. Whatever the wise ones want, whatever they say, you are going back to their tents. You will not have to come near me again. In fact, if you do, I'll send you away. Why hesitate on that? She gave him anger, coldness, bitterness when she was awake and asleep. It was a crazy thing to do. You could have killed yourself. He was stroking her hair again. He could not seem to stop. If you ever do anything half so crazy again, I'll break your neck. Do you have any idea how I will miss hearing you breathe at night? Miss it. She drove him crazy with it. He was the one who was mad. He had to stop this. You are going away, and that's that. If I have to send you back to Rhuidean. The wise ones can't stop me if I speak as Ka Karn. You won't have to run away from me again. The hand that he could not stop from stroking her hair froze as she stirred. She was warm, he realized. Very warm. He should be wrapping one of the blankets about himself decently and moving away. Her eyes opened, clear and deep green, staring at him seriously from not a foot away. She did not seem surprised to see him, and she did not pull back. He took his arms from around her, started to slither away, and she seized a handful of his hair in a painful grip. If he moved, he would have a bald patch. She gave him no chance to explain anything. I promised my near sister to watch you. She seemed to be speaking to herself as much to him, in a low, almost expressionless voice. I ran from you as hard as I could to shield my honor, and you followed me even here. The rings do not lie, and I can run no more. Her tone firmed decisively. I will run no more. Rand tried to ask her what she meant while attempting to untangle her fingers from his hair, but she clutched another handful on the other side and pulled his mouth to hers. That was the end of rational thought. The void shattered and Sayadin fled. He did not think he could have stopped himself had he wanted to. Only he could not think of wanting to, and she certainly did not seem to want him to. In fact,
Still another
the last
dab
thought he had of any coherency for a very long time was that he did not think he could have stopped her. Some considerable time later, 2 hours, maybe 3, he could hardly be sure, he lay atop the rugs with the blankets over him and his hands behind his head, watching Avienda examine the slick white walls. They had held a surprising amount of the warmth. There was no need to latch onto Sayadin again, either to shut out cold or to try warming the air. She had done no more than rake her fingers through her hair on rising, and she moved completely unashamed at her nakedness. Of course, it was a bit late to be ashamed of something as small as having no clothes on. He had been worried about hurting her when dragging her out of the water, but she showed fewer scrapes than he did, and somehow they did not seem to mar her beauty at all. "What is this?" she asked. "Snow." He explained what snow was as best he could, but she only shook her head, partly in wonderment, partly in disbelief. For someone who had grown up in the waste, frozen water falling from the sky must seem as impossible as flying. According to the records, the only time it had ever even rained in the waste was the time he had made it. He could not stop a sigh of regret when she began pulling her shift over her head. "The wise ones can marry us as soon as we get back." He could still feel his weave, holding her gateway open. Avienda's dark reddish head popped through the neck of the shift and stared at him flatly. Not unfriendly, but not friendly either. Determined, though. "What makes you think a man has the right to ask me that? Besides, you belong to Elaine." After a moment, he managed to close his mouth. "Avienda, the two of us, we have to marry now. Not that I'm doing it because I have to," he added hastily. "I want to." He was not sure of that at all, really. He thought he might love her, but he thought he might love Elaine, too. And for some reason, Min kept creeping in. "You're as big a lecher as Matt." But for once, he could do what was right because it was right. She sniffed at him and felt her stockings to be sure they were dry, then sat down and donned them. Egwene has spoken to me about marriage customs. "Wait a year?" he asked incredulously. "Yes, that is what I meant." I realized before, the woman showed pulling on a stocking, that could seem so thrilling after he had seen her naked and sweating, and he concentrated on listening to her. Egwene said she thought of asking her mother's permission for you, but before she mentioned it, her mother told her she had to wait another year, even if she did have her hair in a braid. Avienda frowned, one knee almost under her chin. "Is that right? She said a girl was not allowed to braid her hair until she was old enough to marry. Do you understand what I am saying? You look like that fish Moraine caught in the river." There were no fish in the waste. Aiel knew them only from books. He said. He might as well have been deaf and blind for all he understood. Shifting under the blankets, he made himself sound as sure as he could manage. "At least, well, the customs are complicated, and I'm not certain which part you are talking about." She looked at him suspiciously for a moment, but Aiel customs were so intricate that she believed him.
Excuse
In the
me.
2 Rivers, you walked out for a year, if you suited, then you became betrothed, and finally married. That was as far as custom went. She went on as she dressed. I meant about a girl asking her mother's permission during the year, and the wisdoms. I cannot say I understand that." The white blouse going over her head muffled her words for a moment. If she wants him, and she is old enough to marry, why should she need permission? But you see, by my customs, her tone of voice said they were the only ones that mattered. It is I to choose whether to ask you, and I will not. By your customs, fastening her belt, she shook her head dismissively. I did not have my mother's permission. And you would need your father's, I suppose. Or your father-brother's, since your father is dead. We did not have them, so we cannot marry. She began folding the scarf to wrap around her forehead. I see, he said weakly. Any boy in the Two Rivers who asked his father for that kind of permission was asking to have his ears soundly boxed. When he thought of the lads who had sweated themselves silly, worrying that someone, anyone, would find out what they were doing with the girl they meant to marry. For that matter, he remembered when Nynaeve caught Kimry Lewin and Bar Doubtray in Bar's father's hayloft. Kimry had had her hair braided for 5 years, but when Nynaeve was through with her, Mistress Lewin had taken over. The women's circle had nearly skinned poor Bar alive, and that was nothing to what they had done to Kimry over the month they thought was the shortest decent time to wait for a wedding. The joke, told quietly, where it would not get to the women's circle, had been that neither Bar nor Kimry had been able to sit down the whole first week they were married. Rand supposed Kimry had failed to ask permission. But I guess Egwene wouldn't know all the men's customs, after all, he continued. Women don't know everything. You see, since I started it, we have to marry. It doesn't matter about permissions. You started it? Her sniff was pointed and meaning. Aiel, Andren, or anything else, women use those noises like sticks to prod or thump. It does not matter anyway, since we are going by Aiel customs. This will not happen again, Rand al'Thor. He was surprised and pleased to hear regret in her voice. You belong to the near sister of my near sister. I have told to Elaine now, but that is none of your concern. Are you going to lie there forever? I have heard that men turn lazy after, but it cannot be long until the clans are ready to begin the morning's march. You must be there. Suddenly, a stricken look crossed her face, and she sagged to her knees. If we can return, I'm not certain that I remember what I did to make the whole, Rand al'Thor. You must find our way back. He told her how he had blocked her gateway and could still feel it holding. She looked relieved and even smiled at him. But it became increasingly clear as she pulled at her legs and arranged her skirts that she did not mean to turn her back while he dressed. There's fair, he muttered after a long moment, and scrambled out of the blankets. He tried to be as nonchalant as she had been, but it was not easy. He could feel her eyes like a touch, even when he turned away. She had no call to tell him he had a pretty behind. He had not said anything about how pretty hers was. She only said it to make him blush anyway. Women did not look at men that way. And they don't ask their mother's permission, too. He had an idea that life with Aviendha had not become one bit easier. Chapter 32. A short time. There was little discussion. Even if the storm still raged outside, they could make it back to the gateway using the blankets and rugs for cloaks. Aviendha began dividing them while he seized Saladin, filling himself with light and death, molten fire and liquid ice. Split them equally, he told her. He knew his voice was cold and emotionless. Asmodean had said he could go beyond that, but he had not managed to so far. She gave him a surprised look, but all she said was, "There is more of you to cover," and went on as she was. There was no point in arguing. In his experience from Emond's Field to the Maiden, if a woman wanted to do something for you, the only way to stop her was to tie her up, especially if it involved sacrifice on her part. The surprise was that she had not sounded acid, had not sounded being a soft wetland. Maybe something good besides this. Really mean never again. He suspected that she meant exactly that, though. Weaving a finger-thin flow of fire, he sliced the outline of a door in one wall, widening the gap at the top. Startlingly, daylight shone through. Releasing Saidin, he exchanged surprised looks with Avienda. He knew he had lost track of time. He lost track of the year. But they could not have been inside that long. Wherever they were, it was a great distance from Kyrian. He pushed against the block, but it did not budge until he put his back into it, dug in his heels, and shoved with all of his might. Just as it occurred to him that he very probably could have done this more easily with the power, the block toppled outward, taking him with it into cold...
Hey, Fire, how you doing, bro?
Not all
Thanks for stopping by.
It stopped at an angle, propped against snow that had built up around the hut.
Hope your night's going good.
Lying on his back, with only a bit of his head sticking out.
Since you're here, let's do a dab.
Some smooth drifts around sparse, stunted trees that he did not recognize. Others may be burying bushes or boulders. He opened his mouth and forgot what he was going to say as something swept through the air. A leathery gray shape, far bigger than a bird, with slow beating widespread wings. A horny snout thrust out before, and clawed feet and thin lizard-like tail trailing behind. His head twisted on its own to follow the thing's flight over the trees. There were two people on his back. Despite what seemed to be some sort of hooded garments, it was plain that they were scanning the ground below. If he had had more than his head showing, if he had not been directly under the creature, they would surely have seen him. Leave the blankets, he said, as he ducked back inside. He told her what he had seen. Maybe they'd be friendly and maybe not, but I'd as soon not find out. He was not sure he wanted to meet people who wrote something like that in any case. If they were people. We are going to sneak back as quickly as we can. For a wonder, what he could see as he was helping her climb the block, that was a wonder too. She accepted his hand without so much as a glare. She said, I do not argue when you make sense, Randolph. That was hardly the way he lay flat beneath its deep blanket of snow. Vast, sharp, white-tipped mountains, peaks wreathed in cloud. He had no difficulty knowing they lay west.
Cheers, bro.
The sun was rising. Less than half exploding ball stuck above the ocean.
That's definitely a good one there.
The land slanted down enough for him to see waves crashing in violent spray on a rocky, boulder-strewn shore maybe half a mile away. An ocean to the east, stretching endlessly to the horizon and sun. If the snow had not been enough, that told him they were in no land he knew. Avienda stared at the rolling breakers and pounding then frowned at him. She might never have seen an ocean, but she had seen maps. In her skirts, the snow gave her even more trouble than it did him, and he floundered, digging his way through as much as walking, sometimes sinking to his waist. She gasped.
How's your night going, Fire?
His arms and her green eyes glared. We have to move faster than you can dragging those skirts, he told her. The glare faded.
Hope everyone's doing good tonight.
An arm around his neck as he had half hoped. Instead, she folded her hands and put on a patient face, a bit touched with sullenness. Whatever changes what they had done might have wrought in her, she was not completely defeated. He could not understand why that should be a relief. He could have melted a path through the snow as he had in the storm, but if another of those flying things came, that cleared path would lead straight to them. A fox trotted by across the snow well to his right, pure white except for a black tip with bushy tail. Flying him and Avienda went. Rabbit tracks marred the snow in places, blurred where they had left. And once he saw the prints of a cat that had to be as large as a leopard. Maybe there were larger animals still. maybe some flightless relative of that leathery creature. Not something he wanted to encounter, but there was always the chance the
Let's do another one.
might take the plowed furrow he was leaving now as the track of some animal. He still made his way from tree to tree, wishing there were more of them, and closer together. Of course, if there had been, he might not have found Avienda in the storm. She grunted, frowning up at him, and he loosened his hold on her again. But it would surely have helped now. It was because
Oh,
she
yeah,
was creeping
fire.
in that way, though, that he saw the others first. Less than 50 paces away, between him and the gateway, right at the gateway, he could feel his weed holding it, were 4 people on horseback and more than 20 afoot. The mounted were all women shrouded in long, thick, fur-lined cloaks. 2 of them each wore a silvery bracelet on her left wrist, connected by a long leash of the same shining stuff to a bright collar tied around the neck of a gray-clad, cloakless woman standing in the snow. The others afoot wore dark leather, armor painted green and gold, overlapping plates down their chests and the outsides of their arms and fronts of their thighs. Their spears bore green and gold tassels, their long shields painted in the same colors, and their helmets seemed to be faces peering out. One was clearly an officer, lacking spear or shield, but with a curved-handed sword on his back. The sword outlined the plates of his lacquered armor, and thin green plumes like feelers looped his painted helmet. And knew where he and Avienda were. He had seen armor like that before, and like that. Suddenly, it looked a little like a wind torpedo, except that its trunk was smooth and gray, streaked with black. He pointed, and she nodded silently. The 2 women on leashes. Can you block them? Hurriedly, he added, "Don't embrace the source yet. They're prisoners, but they still might warn the others." The women with the bracelets might be sense you. She looked at him oddly, but wasted no time on foolish questions, such as how he knew. They would come later, he knew. The women with the bracelets can channel also, she replied, just as softly. It feels very strange, though. Weak, as if they had never practiced it. Brand could. The Mani were the ones who were able to channel. They had somehow slipped through the Shanshan net to become Suldam instead. And from the little he knew of them, that would not be easy, for the Shanshan tested every last woman during the years that she might have been channeling. They would surely know their names. Can you shield all 4? She gave him a very smug look. Of course. Egwene taught me to handle several flows at once. I can block them, twist those on, and wrap them up in flows of air. That self-satisfied little smile faded.
Oh, that one hurt a little bit.
Them and their horses. But that leaves me until I can bring help. Cast those spears this way, and if one of them pins you to the ground. For a moment she muttered under her breath, as if angry that she could not complete a sentence. Finally she looked at him. Her gaze as sharp as I've never seen it. Egwene has told me of healing, but she knows little, and I less. What could she be angry about now? Better to try understanding the sun than a woman, he thought wryly. Tom Maryland had told him that, and it was simple truths. You take care of shielding those women, he told her. Not he could tell she thought he was boasting, but he would not have to split flows, only weave one intricate flow of air
Right.
that would bind arms to sides and hold horses' feet as well as human. Taking a deep breath, he
Got that one out of.
touched her arm and channeled.
Excuse me.
Shocked cries rose
Just
from
the right
Shanshan.
temperature to where I could get
He should have thought
a
of
monster dab,
but they could be through the gateway before
which
they
I
were
wasn't
anywhere
expecting.
else. Holding onto the source, he seized Avienda's arm and half dragged her through the snow, ignoring her snarls that she could walk. At least this way he broke a trail for her, and they had to hurry. The Shonchan staring as he and Avienda stand in front of them. The two women who were not Suldam had thrown back their hoods, struggling against his weave. He held it rather than tying. He would have to release it when he went away anyway, for the simple reason that he could not leave even Shonchan bound in the snow. If they did not freeze to death, there was always the big cat whose tracks he had seen. Where there was one, there must be more. The gateway was there all right, but instead of looking into his room in Ironrod, it was a gray blank. It seemed narrower than he remembered, too. Worse, he could see the weave of that grayness. It had been woven from Saidin. Furious thought slid across the void. He could not tell what it was meant to do, yet it could easily be a trap for whoever stepped through, woven by one of the male Forsaken. By Asmodean, most likely. If the man could hand him over to the others, he might be able to regain his place among them. Yet there could be no question of staying here. If Avienda only remembered how she had woven the gateway in the first place, she could open another. But as it was, they were going to have to use this, trap or no. One of the mounted women, a black raven in front of a stark tower on the gray breast of her cloak, had a severe face and dark eyes that seemed to want to drill into his skull. Another, younger and paler and shorter, yet more regal, wore a silver stag's head on her green cloak. The little fingers of her riding gloves were too long. Rand knew from the shaven sides of her scalp that those long fingers covered nails grown long and no doubt lacquered, both signs of Shonchan nobility. The soldiers were stiff-faced and stiff-backed, but the officer's blue eyes glittered behind the jaws of the insect-like helmet, and his gauntleted fingers writhed as he struggled futilely to reach his sword. Rand did not care very much about them, but he did not want to at least he could give them a chance to escape. They might be staring at him as they would a wild animal with bared fangs, but they had not chosen to be prisoners, treated little better than domestic animals themselves. He put a hand to the collar of the nearest and felt a jolt that nearly numbed his arm. For an instant, the void shifted, and Saidin raged through him like the snowstorm 1,000-fold. The Damani's short yellow hair flailed as she convulsed at his touch, screaming, and the Suldam connected to her gasped, face going white. Both would have fallen, if not held by bonds of air. "You try it," he told Avienda, working his hand. "A woman must be able to touch the thing safely. I don't know how it unfastens." It looked of a piece, linked somehow, just like bracelet and leash. But it went on, so it must be able to come off. A few moments could not make any difference to whatever had happened to the gateway. Was it Asmodean? Avienda shook her head, but began fumbling at the other woman's collar. "Hold still," she growled as the Damani, a pale-faced girl of 16 or 17, tried to flinch back.
No shit.
If the leashed woman had looked on Rand as a wild beast, they stared at Avienda like a nightmare made flesh.
That'd be crazy to be
in the pale girl wailed.
Crazy,
mistress. Please, mistress,
snowstorm.
The other Damani, older, almost motherly, began weeping uncontrollably. Avienda glared at Rand as hard as she did the girl.
I've been in some like pretty bad snow,
under her breath as she
but
the collar.
nothing like
It is he, Lady Morris.
nothing really bad compared to what I've seen
Said
nowadays.
suddenly in a soft drawl that Rand could barely understand. "I have borne the bracelet long, and I could tell if the Marath Damani had done more than block Ginny." Morsa did not look surprised. In fact, there seemed to be a light of horrified recognition in her blue eyes
shit, that's
as she
crazy.
gazed at Rand. There was only one way that could be. "You were at Falma," he said. If he went through first, it meant leaving Avienda behind, although only for a moment. "I was..." The noblewoman looked faint, but her slow, slurring voice was coolly imperative. "I saw you, and what you did. Take care I don't do the same here. Give me no trouble, and I will leave you in peace." He could not send Avienda first, into the light knew what. If emotion had not been so distant, he would have grimaced the way she was grimacing over that collar. They had to go through together and be ready to face anything. Much has been kept secret about what happened in the lands of the great Hawkwing, Lady Morsa, the severe-faced woman said. Her dark eyes were as hard on Morsa as they had been on him. Rumors fly that the ever-victorious army has tasted defeat. Do you seek truth in rumor, Jallandin? Morsa asked in a cutting tone. A seeker, above all, should know when to keep silent. The Empress herself has forbidden speech of the Carina until she calls it again. If you or I speak so much as the name of the city where that expedition landed, our tongues will be removed. Perhaps you would enjoy being tongueless in the Tower of Ravens? Not even the listeners will scream for mercy or pay heed. Rand understood no more than 2 words in 3, and it was not the odd accents. He wished he had time to listen. Corina, the return. That was what the Shonchan and Falma had called their attempt to seize the lands beyond the Arath Ocean. Lands where he lived, that they considered their birthright. The rest, Seeker, listeners, the Tower of Ravens, were a mystery. But apparently the return had been called off, for the time being at least. That was worth knowing. The gateway was narrower. Maybe as much as a finger-width narrower than moments before. Only his block held it open. It had tried to close as soon as Avienda released her weave, and it was still trying to. Hurry, he told Avienda, and she gave him a look so patient it could as well have been a stone between his eyes. I am trying, Randalthor, she said, still working at the collar. Tears trickled down Sarah's cheeks. Container. A continuous low moan came from her throat, as if the Aiel woman intended to slit it. You nearly killed the other 2, and maybe yourself. I could feel the power rushing into both of them wildly when you touched the other collar. So leave it to me, and if I can do it, I will. Muttering a curse, she tried at the side. Rand thought about making the Suldam remove the collar. If anyone knew how the things came off, they would. But from the set frowns on their faces, he knew he would have to force them to it. If he could not kill a woman, he could not very well torture her. With a sigh, he glanced at the gray blankness, filling the gateway again. The flows appeared to be woven into his. He could not slice one without the other. Passing through might trigger the trap, but cutting away the grayness, even if that act did not trip it, would allow the gateway to snap shut before they had a chance to leap through. It would have to be a blind jump into the light knew what. Morsa had listened carefully to every word he and Avienda said, and now she was gazing thoughtfully at the 2 Suldam. But Jallandin had never taken her eyes from the noblewoman's face. Much has been kept a secret that should not be held from the Seekers, Lady Morsa, the stern woman said. The Seekers must know all. You forget yourself, Jallandin, Morsa snapped, her gloved hands jerking. Had her arms not been bound to her sides, she would have sawed the reins. As it was, she tilted her head to stare down her nose at the other woman. You were sent to me because Sarak looks above himself and has designs on Sarengadadai and Tual, not to ask of what the Empress has... Jallandin broke in harshly. It is you who forgets herself, Lady Morsa, if you think that you are proof against the seekers for truth. I myself have put both a daughter and a son of the Empress, may the light bless her, to the question, and in gratitude for the confessions I wrenched from them, she allowed me to gaze upon her. Think you that your minor house stands higher than the Empress's own children? Morsa remained upright, not that she had much choice, but her face went gray and she licked her lips. The Empress, may the light illumine her forever, already knows far more than I can tell. I did not mean to imply. The Seeker cut her off again, twisting her head to speak to the soldiers as if Morsa did not exist. The woman Morsa is in the custody of the Seekers for Truth. She will be put to the question as soon as we return to Merenlo. And the Suldam and Damani as well. It seems they too have hidden what they should not. Horror painted the faces of the named women, but Morsa could have stood for any of them. Eyes wide and suddenly haggard, she slumped as much as her invisible bonds would allow, voicing not a word of protest. She looked as if she had wanted to scream, yet she accepted. Jellandon's gaze turned to Rand. She named you Rand al'Thor. You will be well treated if you surrender to me, Rand al'Thor. However you came here, you cannot think to escape, even if you kill us. There is a wide search for a Marath Damane who channeled in the night. Her eyes flickered to Avienda. It will find you as well, inevitably. And you might be slain by accident. There is sedition in this district. I do not know how men like you are treated in your lands, but in Seanchan, your sufferings can be eased. Here, you can find great honor in the use of your power. He laughed at her, and she looked offended. I cannot kill you, but I vow I should strike your hide at least for that. He certainly would not have to worry about being gentled in Seanchan hands. In Seanchan, men who could channel were killed, not executed, hunted and shot down on sight. The gray-filled gateway was another finger narrower, barely wide enough now for both of them to pass through together. Leave her, Avienda. We have to go now. She released Ceri's collar and gave him an exasperated look, but her eyes went past him to the gateway, and she lifted her skirts to stump through the snow to him, muttering to herself about frozen water. Be ready for anything, he told her, putting an arm around her shoulders. He told himself they had to be close together to fit, not because she felt good. I don't know what, but be ready. She nodded, and he said, Jump! Together they leaped into the grayness, Rand releasing the weave that had held the Seanchan in order to fill himself to bursting with saidin, and landed stumbling in his bedchamber in Ironrod, lamplit with darkness outside the windows. Asmodean sat against the wall beside the door with his legs crossed. He was not embracing the source, but Rand slammed a block between the man and saidin anyway.
Cheers, fire.
Still around Avienda, he found the gateway gone. No, not gone. He could still see his weaving, and what he knew must be Asmodean's. But there seemed to be nothing there at all. Without pause, he slashed his weave, and suddenly the gateway appeared. A rapidly narrowing view of Seanchan, the Lady Morsa slumped in her saddle, Jellandon shouting orders. A green and white tasseled spear lanced through the opening, and snapped shut. Instinctively, Rand channeled air to snatch the suddenly wobbling 2-foot length of spear. The shaft ended as smoothly as any craftsman could have worked it. Shivering, he was glad that he had not tried removing the gray barrier, whatever it had been, before jumping through. A good thing neither of the Suldam recovered in time, he said, taking the severed spear in his hand. Or we'd have had it worse than this coming after us. He watched Asmodean from the corner of his eye, but the man only sat there, looking slightly ill. He could not know whether Rand meant to stuff that spear down his throat. Avienda's sniff was her most pointed yet. Do you think I released them? She said heatedly. She removed his arm firmly, but he did not think her temper was for him. Or not for his arm, anyway. I tied their shields as tightly as I could. They are your enemies, Rand al'Thor. Even the ones you called Damani are faithful dogs would have killed you rather than be free. You must be hard with your enemies, not soft. She was right, he thought, hefting the spear. He had left enemies behind that he might well have to face one day. He had to become harder. Or else he would be ground to flour before he ever reached Shale Ghul. Abruptly, she began smoothing her skirts, and her voice became almost conversational. I noticed that you did not save that way-faced Morsa from her fate. From the way you looked at her, I thought big eyes and a round bosom had caught your eye. Rand stared at her in amazement that oozed across the emptiness surrounding him like syrup. She could have been saying the soup was ready. He wondered how he was supposed to have noticed Morsa's bosom, hidden as it was in a fur-lined cloak. I should have brought her, he said. to question her about the Shonchan. I will be troubled by them again, I am afraid. The glint that had appeared in her eye vanished. She opened her mouth, but stopped, glancing at Asmodean, when he raised a hand. He could all but see the questions about Shonchan piled up behind her eyes. If he knew her, once begun, she would not stop digging until she had uncovered scraps he did not even remember he knew. Which might not be a bad thing. Another time. After he had wrung a few answers out of Asmodean. She was right. He had to be hard. That was a smart thing you did, she said, hiding the hole I made. If a guy Shine had come in here, 1,000 of the Spear Sisters might have marched for seeking you. Asmodean cleared his throat. One of the guy Shine did come. Someone named Sulin had told her she must see you eat, my Lord Dragon. And to stop her from bringing the tray in here and finding you gone, I took the liberty of telling her that you and the young woman did not want to be disturbed. A slight tightening of his eyes caught Rand's attention. What? Just that she took it strangely. She laughed out loud and went running off. A few minutes later, there must have been 20 Fardarais Mai beneath the window, shouting and beating their spears and their bucklers for a good hour or more. I must say, my Lord Dragon, some of the suggestions they called up startled even me. Rand felt his cheeks burning. It had happened on the other side of the bloody world, and still the maidens knew. But Aviendha only narrowed her eyes. Did she have hair and eyes like mine? She did not wait for Asmodean's nod. It must have been my first sister, Niella. She saw the startled question on Rand's face and answered it before he could speak. Niella is a weaver, not a maiden, and she was taken half a year ago by Charine maidens during a raid on Sulara Hold. She tried to talk me out of taking the spear, and she has always wanted me wed. I'm going to send her back to the Charine with a welt on her bottom for everyone she told. Rand caught her arm as she started to stalk out of the room. I want to talk with Neter. I don't suppose there is much time left until dawn. 2 hours, maybe, Asmodean put in. So there will be little sleeping now. If you want to try, would you mind making your bed elsewhere for what's left of the night? You need new blankets anyway. She nodded curtly before pulling loose and slammed the door behind her. Surely she was not angry at being tossed out of his bedchamber. How could she be? She had said nothing more would happen between them. But he was glad he was not Niella. Bouncing the shortened spear in his hand, he turned to Asmodean. A strange scepter, my Lord Dragon. It will do for one. To remind him that the Shonchan were still out there. For once he wished his voice was even colder than the void and Saidin made it. He had to be hard. Before I decide whether to skewer you with it like a lamb, why did you never mention this trick of making something invisible? If I hadn't been able to see the flows, I'd never have known the gateway was still there. Asmodean swallowed, shifting as though he did not know whether Rand meant his threat. Rand was not sure himself. My Lord Dragon, you never asked. A matter of bending light. You always have so many questions, it is hard to find a moment to speak of anything else. You must realize by now that I've thrown my lot in with yours completely. Licking his lips, he got up, as far as his knees, and began to babble. I felt your weave. Anybody within a mile could have felt it. I never saw anything like it. I didn't know that anyone but Demon Dread could block a gateway that was open. And maybe Cimarag. And Roose Theron. I felt it, and came. And a hard time I had getting past it. The same trick. You must know I am your man now. My Lord Dragon, I am your man. It was the repetition of what the Karianan had said that got through as much as anything else. Gesturing with the half-spear, he said roughly, Stand. You want a dog. But as Asmodean slowly rose, he laid the long spear point alongside the man's throat. He had to be hard. From now on, you will tell me 2 things I don't ask about every time we talk. Every time, mind. If I think you are trying to hide anything from me, you will be glad to let Cimarag have you. As you say, my Lord Dragon, Asmodean stammered. He looked ready to bow and kiss Rand's hand. To avoid the chance, Rand moved to the blanketless bed and sat on the linen sheet, the feather mattresses yielding under him as he studied the spear. A good idea to keep it for remembrance, if not as a scepter. Even with everything else, he had best not forget the Seanchan. Those Damani. If Aviendha had not been there to block them from the source. You have tried showing me how to shield a woman and failed. Try showing me how to avoid blows I cannot see, how to counter them. Once Lanfear had sliced his weavings as neatly as with a knife. Not easy, my Lord Dragon, without a woman to practice against. We have 2 hours, Rand said coldly, letting the man's shield unravel. Try. Try very hard.
Chapter 33. A Question of Crimson. The knife brushed Nynaeve's hair as it thunked into the board she was leaning against, and she flinched behind her blindfold. She wished she had a decent braid instead of locks hanging loose about her shoulders. If that blade had cut even one strand. Fool woman, she thought bitterly. Fool woman. With the scarf folded over her eyes, she could just see a narrow line of light at the bottom. It seemed bright from the darkness behind the thick folds. There had to be enough light yet, even if it was late afternoon. Surely the man would not throw when he could not see properly. The next blade struck on the other side of her head. She could feel it vibrating. She thought it almost touched her ear. She was going to kill Thom Merrilin and Vaylin Luca, and maybe any other man she could get her hands on sheer principle. "The pears!" Luca shouted, as if he were not just 30 paces from her. He must think the blindfold made her deaf as well as blind. Fumbling in the pouch at her belt, she brought out a pear and carefully balanced it atop her head. She was blind, a pure blind fool. 2 more pears, and she gingerly extended her arms to either side between the knives that outlined her, holding one in either hand by the stems. There was a pause. She opened her mouth to tell Thom Merrilin that if he so much as nicked her, she would chunk, chunk, chunk. The blades came so fast, she would have yelped if her throat had not contracted like a fist. She held only the stem in her left hand. The other pear trembled faintly with the knife through it, and the pear on her head leaked juice into her hair. Snatching the scarf off, she stalked toward Thom and Luca, both of them grinning like maniacs. Before she could speak one of the words boiling up in her, Luca said admiringly,
At least she was
"You are
blindfolded.
magnificent, Nana. Your bravery is magnificent, but you are more so." He swirled that ridiculous red silk cloak in a bow. One hand
I don't know if
on
I can
his
stand there and not
I
flinch
call
while
this
someone's throwing
rose
knives at me.
thorns. Though truly, you are more beautiful than any mere rose.
My ass would
It
have to be
doesn't take
blindfolded
much bravery
just so
to
I don't
stand like a stump. A
move
rose,
or
was she? She would
twitch
show him
into it.
thorns. She would show both of them. You listen to me, Vaylin Luca. Such courage. You never even flinch. I tell you, I would not have the stomach to do what you are doing. That was the simple truth, she told herself. I am no braver than I have to be, she said in a milder tone. It was hard to shout at a man who insisted on telling you how brave you were. Certainly better to hear than all that blather about roses. Thom knuckled his long white mustaches as if he saw something funny. "The dress," Luca said, showing all of his teeth in a smile. "You will look wonderful in—" "No," she snapped. Whatever he had gained, he had just lost by bringing this up again. Clarine had made the dress Luca wanted her to wear, in silk more crimson than his cloak. It was her opinion that the color was to hide blood if Thom's hand slipped. But Nana, beauty in danger is a great draw, Luca's voice crooned, as if whispering sweetness in her ear. You will have every eye on you, every heart pounding for your beauty and courage. If you like it so much, she said firmly, you wear it. Aside from the color, she was not about to show that much bosom in public, whether or not Clarine thought it was proper. She had seen Lattel's performing dress, all black spangles with a high neck to her chin. She could wear something like... What was she thinking? She had no intention of actually going through with this. She'd only agreed to this practice to stop Luca scratching at the wagon door every night to try convincing her. The man was nothing if not deft at knowing when to change the subject. "What happened here?" he asked, suddenly all smooth solicitude. She flinched as he touched her puffy eye. It was his bad luck to choose that. He would have done better to continue trying to stuff her into that red dress. "I did not like the way it looked at me in the mirror this morning, so I bit it." Her flat tone and bared teeth made Luca snatch his hand back. From the wary gleam in his dark eyes, he suspected she might bite again. Tom was stroking his mustaches furiously, red in the face from the effort of not laughing. He knew what had happened, of course. He would. And as soon as she left, he would no doubt regale Luca with his version of events. Men
That's
could not
funny.
avoid gossiping. It was in them at birth, and nothing women could do ever got it out of them. The daylight was dimmer than she had thought. The sun sat red on the
I remember when I
treetops to
read
the
the
west.
book, when I got to
"If
that
you
part
ever
when I
try
was
this
reading
again
it,
without better light,"
kind of made me
she
chuckle a
growled,
little bit.
shaking a fist at Tom. "It's
Had to
always
stop
does
there
it."
and get a good little
"I
laugh going there.
suppose," the man
Go
said,
back at it.
bushy eyebrow lifting. "This means you want to leave out the bit where I am blindfolded?" He was joking, of course. He had to be joking. "As you wish, Nana. From now on, only in the most perfect light." It was not until she stalked away, swishing her skirts angrily, that she realized that she had agreed to actually do this fool thing. By implication, at least. They would try to hold her to it as surely as the sun would set tonight. Fool, fool, fool woman. The clearing where they, or Tom at least, burn him and Luca both, had been practicing stood some little distance from the camp over beside the road north. Doubtless Luca had not wanted to upset the animals should Tom put one of his knives through her heart. The man would likely have fed her corpse to the lions. The only reason he wanted her to wear that dress was so he could ogle what she had no intention of showing to anyone but Lan, and burn him too for a stubborn fool man. She wished she had him there so she could tell him so. She wished she had him there so she could be sure he was safe. She broke a dead dog fennel and used its feathery brown length like a whip to snap the heads off weeds that poked through the leaves on the ground. Last night, Elaine had said, Egwene reported fighting in Cairhien, skirmishes with brigands, and Cairhienin who saw any Aiel as an enemy, with Andoran soldiers trying to claim the Sun Throne for Morghese. Lan had been involved in them. Whenever Moiraine let him out of her sight, he apparently managed to take himself to the fighting, as if he could sense where it would be. Nynaeve had never thought that she would want the Aes Sedai to keep Lan on a short leash at her side. This morning, Elaine had still been disturbed about her mother's soldiers being in Cairhien fighting Rand's Aiel, but what worried Nynaeve was the brigands. According to Egwene, if anyone could identify stolen property in a brigand's possession, if anyone could swear to seeing him kill anyone or burn so much as a shed, Rand was hanging him. He did not put his hands on the rope, but it was the same thing, and Egwene said he watched every execution with a face cold and hard as the mountains. That was not like him. He had been a gentle boy. Whatever had happened to him in the waste had been very much for the worse. Well, Rand was far away, and her own problems, hers and Elaine's, were no nearer solution. The river Eldar lay less than a mile north, spanned by a single lofty stone bridge built between tall metal pillars that glistened without a speck of rust. Remnants of an earlier time, certainly, perhaps even an earlier age. She'd gone up to it at midday, right after they arrived, but there had not been a boat in the river worthy of the name. Rowboats, small fishing boats working along the reed-lined banks, some strange, narrow little things that skittered over the water propelled by kneeling men with paddles. even a squat barge that looked to be moored in mud. There seemed to be a lot of mud showing on both sides, some of it dried hard and cracked. Yet that was no wonder with the heat holding on so unseasonably. But nothing that could carry them swiftly
This
away
chair's
down
somewhat
where she wanted.
comfortable. Just
Not that she knew where
I
it
like
would
how
take
it's a
her.
rocker. I wish it had
Rack her brains
a
as
lot
she
more
would,
padding than
she could not remember
than
the name of the
well, I
town
said
where
that
the
what
Blue
it,
Sisters
what
were
it has,
supposed
but
to
it
be.
doesn't have none at
She
all.
swiped savagely at the scatterhead, and
Excuse
it
me.
burst in little white feathers that floated to
It's
the
one of
ground.
those little
They probably were not
rocking
there
ones
anymore in
that
any
you
case
take
if they ever
camping.
had been. But
So
it was the
there's
only
one
clue
of
they
them
had
that don't
to
have
a
no
safe
padding
place
on
short
them.
of Tyr, if she could only remember it. The only good thing on the entire journey north was that Elaine had stopped flirting with Tom. There had not been an incident since joining the show. At least it would have been.
Now, this
good
was
if
actually
Elaine
made
hadn't
to.
decided to pretend nothing had ever
It
happened.
sits flat, but it has
Yesterday,
little
Nynaeve had congratulated
like
her
little
on
mini
coming
shocks
to her
on the back,
senses,
so I
and
could
Elaine
just.
had coolly replied, "Are you trying to find out if I will stand in your way with Tom?"
I just wish it had
He's rather old
a
for
little bit
you,
more
and
padding
I
on
don't
it to
think
where it's
he'd
a little bit more
plant your
comfortable.
affections elsewhere. But you are old enough to make your own decisions. I am fond of Tom, as I think he is of me. I look on him like a second
Cause I
father.
usually take this out when
If
we
you
go
want to flirt
fishing,
with
just
him,
so I can
you
sit
have
there
my
and
permission. But I really did think you were
a
more
rock
honest.
like that. Well, wait for a fish to
Luca
bite.
meant to cross the river in the morning, and Samara, the town on the other side in Gildan, was no fit place to be. Luca had spent most of the day since their arrival over in Samara, securing a place to set up his show. He was only concerned that a number of other menageries had beaten him there, and he was not the only one to have more than animals. That was why he had grown particularly insistent about her letting Tom throw knives at her. She was lucky he did not want it done high-walking with Elaine. The man seemed to think the most important thing in the world was that his show should be bigger and better than any other. For herself, the worrisome thing was that the Prophet was in Samara, his followers crowding the town and spilling out into tents, huts, and shanties around it, a city that overwhelmed Samara's own not inconsiderable size. It had a high stone wall, and most of the buildings were stone as well, many as much as 3 stories, and there were more roofs of slate or tile than thatch. This side of the Eldar was no better. They had passed 3 White Cloak encampments before reaching their stopping place, hundreds of white tents in neat rows, and there had to be more they had not seen. White Cloaks on this side of the river, the Prophet, and maybe a riot waiting to happen on the other. And she had no idea where to go and no way to get there except in a lumbering wagon that moved no faster than she could walk. She wished she had never let Elaine talk her into abandoning the coach. Not seeing a weed close enough to snap without stepping aside, she broke the dog fennel in half, then again, until the pieces were no longer than her hand, and tossed them to the ground. She wished she could do the same with Luca, and Galad Damadred for sending them running here, and Aulan Mandragoran for not being here. Not that she needed him, of course, but his presence would have
Do
been
one more.
a comfort. The camp was quiet, with evening meals cooking over small fires beside the wagons. Petra was feeding the black-maned lion, thrusting huge pieces of meat through the bars on a stick. The female lions were already hunkered down over theirs, companionably, letting out an occasional growl if someone came too close to their cage. Nynaeve stopped near Aludra's wagon. The illuminator was working with wooden mortar and pestle on a table let down from the side of her wagon, muttering to herself over what she was compounding. 3 of the Chavanas smiled at Nynaeve enticingly, motioning her to join them. Not Brug, who still glowered over his lip, though she had given him a salve to make the swelling go down. Maybe if she hit the rest of them as hard, they would listen to Luca, and more importantly to her, and realize that she did not want their smiles. Too bad Master Valen Luca could not follow his own instructions. Latel turned from the bear cage and gave her a tight smile. More of a smirk, really. Mainly, though, Nynaeve stared at Sarandin, who was filing the blunt toenails of one of the huge gray Sredit with what looked like a tool suitable for metal. That one, Aludra said. She uses the hands and the feet with remarkable ability, no? Do not glare at me so, Nana, she added, dusting her hands. I am not your enemy. Here, you must try these new fire sticks. Nynaeve took the wooden box from the dark-haired woman gingerly. It was a cube she could have held easily with one hand, but she used both. I thought you called them strikers. Maybe yes, maybe no. Fire sticks, it says what they are much better than strikers, yes? I have smoothed the little holes that hold the sticks so they can no longer ignite on the wood. A good idea, no? And the heads, they are a new formulation. You will try them and tell me what you think? Yes, of course. Thank you. Nynaeve hurried on before the woman could press another box on her. She held the thing as if it might explode, which she was not certain it would not. Aludra had everyone trying out her strikers or fire sticks or whatever she would decide to call them next. They certainly would light a fire or a lamp. They could also burst into flame if the blue-gray heads rubbed against each other or anything else rough. For herself, she would stick with flint and steel, or a coal kept properly banked in a box of sand. Much
All
safer.
right.
Julian caught her before she could set foot on the steps of the wagon she shared with Elaine, his gaze going straight to her swollen eye. She glared at him so hard that he stepped back and snatched that ridiculous conical cap from his head. "I've been over the river," he said. "There are 100 or so white cloaks in Samara, just watching and being watched as hard themselves by Gildanin soldiers. But I recognized one, the young fellow who was sitting across from the Light of Truth in Sienda." She smiled at him, and he took another hasty step back, eyeing her warily. Galad in Samara. That was all they needed. "You always bring such wonderful news, Julian. We should have left you in Tanchico, or better, on the dock in Tyr." That was hardly fair. Better he told her of Galad than that she walked around a corner into the man. "Thank you, Julian. At least we know to keep an eye out for him now." His nod was hardly a proper response to graciously offered thanks, and he hurried away, clapping his hat on, as if he expected her to hit him. Men had no manners. The interior of the wagon was far cleaner than it had been when Tom and Julian purchased it. The flaking paint had all been scraped off. The men had grumbled about doing that, and the cabinets and the tiny table that was fastened to the floor oiled until they shone. The small brick stove with its metal chimney was never used. The nights were warm enough, and if they began cooking in here, Tom and Julian would never take another turn. But it made a good place to keep their valuables, the purses and the jewelry boxes. The wash-leather pouch holding the seal, that she had stuffed in as far as it would go and had not touched since. Elaine, seated on one of the narrow beds, stuffed something under the blankets when Nynaeve climbed inside. But before she could ask what it was, Elaine exclaimed, "Your eye! What happened to you?" They needed to wash her hair in hen pepper again. Faint hints of gold were showing at the roots of those black tresses. It had to be done every few days. "Sarandon hit me when I wasn't looking," Nynaeve muttered. The remembered taste of boiled catfern and powdered maven's leaf made her tongue curl. That was not why she had let Elaine go to the last meeting in Tel Riyadh too. She was not avoiding Egwene. It was just that she made most of the journeys into the world of dreams between meetings, and it was only fair to give Elaine her chances to go. That was it. Carefully, she put the box of fire sticks into one of the cabinets, next to two more. The one that had actually caught fire was long since discarded. She did not know why she was hiding the truth. Elaine had obviously not been outside the wagon, or she would know already. She and Julian were probably the only people in camp who did not know, now that Tom had surely revealed every disgusting detail to Luca. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the other bed and made herself meet Elaine's eyes. Something in the quiet of the other woman said she knew that more was coming. "I asked Sarandon about Damani and Sul'dam. I'm certain she knows more than she lets on." She paused for Elaine to voice doubts that she had asked rather than demanded, to say that the Shan-Chan woman had already told them all she knew. that she had not had much contact with Damani or Suldam. But Elaine kept silent, and Nynaeve realized that she was only hoping to...
Already getting late, huh? Well, I'm probably going to call into this live for right now, everyone. I want to thank everyone who comes by and keeps coming by and chilling with me. Definitely appreciate all y'all. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.